Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to talk about a brand new NAS operating system known as Fygo OS. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. However, let's be realistic. The last 12 to 18 months has seen an absolute deluge of turnkey NAS solutions rocking out of China, as well as brand new NAS operating systems being developed for your own personal DIY home lab that are all vibing not only to hold your data, but also challenge the status quo, not only from TrueNAS and Unraid, but even challenging these middle ground players like ZimaOS and Turnkey from QTS for QNAP, DSM for Synology and more. Now, full disclosure, this video is sponsored by Fygo or FYGO, but I'm also going to add, if you're listening Fygo, and it'll be weird if you're not, I'd have done this video anyway, not only because you are a new DIY, technically new DIY NAS solution provider in the market right now, but also because TLDR, I really like what they've made here, and it seeks to challenge my up until now fairly steady love affair with the likes of TrueNAS, Unraid and ZimaOS. Fygo OS is arguably the closest off the internet NAS software solution I have found that's getting closer to Synology DSM, and that is a bold claim, and that's what this video is about. I'm not just going to say nice things. There are going to be negatives about this software. I'd be mad if there wasn't, but also there's going to be some of you that are going to have pretty deep questions about this software, something I'm going to put into another video, but for no other reason than the fact that it would triple, possibly quadruple the length of this video. Hopefully you can see on screen a number of questions that I've put forward to the brand with regards to source code, with regards to the security of the platform, local and remote access authentication, development and more. And we'll be covering all of these in a follow-up video, and we will be touching on a number of those answers in this one. But this video is about the OS and ultimately whether it deserves your money and your data. That's correct, you heard me right. This is not free software. This is going to cost you money. There is a free access point and indeed a free trial. But right now, the free version of this software only gives you a small number of users and storage devices with limited larger feature access. Then there's a 30-day trial version, which gives you, again, limited numbers of users and storage devices, but gives you a better access to the software platform. But then after that, there is an annual or a lifetime license. The introductory pricing is $49 a year for the introductory price that will go up to $99 down the road, and the lifetime license, and again kudos for them for having a lifetime license, starts at $199 and will eventually be $299 there, comparable to something like HexOS we saw before. But as we'll see later on in the video, this isn't a skin, this is a full software variation. But it's really important that we frame today's video with that in mind, because if we compare it against something like TrueNAS, which is free, something like this is going to cost you real money. So the money you are paying is hopefully going to save you time, energy, or at the very least give you a feature experience worth that money. But enough of the old jibber jabber, let's get onto the OS. Right, so here I am on the desktop of my Fygo OS NAS. A few things I should have mentioned. Number one, there are chapters all the way along the bottom of the screen. So there's a specific service or feature you're looking out for, you want to check in on, use those chapters. Number two, I should have mentioned this earlier, but this is running on a Beelink ME Pro. It was on the table in the intro there, but this is rocking out on an M150 quad-core Intel CPU with integrated graphics, something that we'll talk about later on, alongside 16 gig of prefixed LPDDR5 memory there. And lastly, although I am on camera right now, I'm going to fade in and out of this throughout the course of the video, because realistically, you're not here for me, you're here for the OS. So again, I'll pop back in a few points later on, but at least for now, that is the system we are rocking. We're running out the version 1.2.0.0.0.7 of their operating system there. Now, before we even get into the design or the feature set or anything, one of the things I do want to talk about is the range of apps. So I alluded to this episode slightly, but fair play, these guys have already rocked out with all of their applications ready to go. This is something we see a lot of the time with NAS brands in the DIY space. Sometimes they introduce apps later down the line. Sometimes they do like an all-in-one app. They're going somewhere down the middle. So whether it is you're rocking out kind of a TV appliance, or you're rocking out a mobile appliance, tablet, or the client applications, Mac OS, Windows, etc., they've already rocked a lot of those out. Something I'll allude to later on though, if we go into the Fygo app, one thing they do have is on-demand sync. Now, you may see that that is a status error right now. The reason that it's a status error is because I've not established remote on this. This is purely local right now, and you can choose to run this pure local. Now, that is with one proviso, it is worth highlighting, and that is to do with that license, because you do need to be online briefly to authenticate that license. After it's authenticated, you're fine, and you can manually download the updates, but again, there is just that one little blip where you're going to need to use it for verifying your license. But once you've done that, you can utilize their remote access path, something we'll talk about later on, or you can use a Tailscale, your own domain, anything like that, to set up your own remote pathway of choice and VPNs, etc. But what's really intriguing to me is the idea that this is one of the first DIY NAS operating systems I've seen. And by the way, I'm including Zima, I'm including TrueNAS, I'm including Unraid, any of those that have file pinning. Now that is important to me. If I go into the desktop, I've already created a pinned folder here, and the contextual right-click option that allows me to completely empty that, or as I regularly access files, to put them in there. So for example, I can free up that space, and now that file is visible on my operating system, but if I open it, it'll open it up. This is part of my B-roll that I'm going to be running, and as you can see, it's now streamed it, it's got the green tick, and it will start to play that file. I should add VLC right now on my local machine. OBS is really eating up a lot of that stuff, so if I double click it, it will go into DX mode. But as you can see, this is some of that B-roll you saw earlier on when I was pre-recording, but it's the idea you've now got that option to file pin on the fly. So if I go into the file section, again, we should really go into this more later on, but the Fygo test folder there, if I go ahead and drag and drop some stuff in, so let's grab some random photos here from my photo folder, drag those over. Again, this is a very minor point, but it's something that Synology and QNAP offer, but they do it on their closed turnkey system. So now I drag and drop those in there, I can go into that local folder, and now that local folder, as you can see, has got the cloud symbol. So it knows the files are on there, they're taking up no space. We go in, we check the properties, as you can see, it's taking up size on disk 8 meg, because I've accessed it to find that information, but double click, and you can see the green tick appearing. It's not perfect yet, but at the very least, they have got that file pinning operation in place, something no other DIY NAS solution currently offers. But that's a slight tangent aside. You came here for the design, and I would say the majority of NAS operating systems right now that are trying to give that turnkey, easy hand-holding experience either try to go for an Apple, like Mac OS design, or they go Linux, Ubuntu, even Android-y there, and I very much say this is the latter. And it's pretty bloody intuitive. I'll say that straight away. I do think that it's a little text heavy at the moment, but I don't think that will bother too many people. But those that are moving away from like a Synology platform might find it a little bit more intimidating. But I think for the rest of the NAS brands, this is pretty relatable. The version we're rocking out right now is 1.20007. There is a larger update coming soon apparently, and there are the options all the way through the settings that you would expect. So again, you've already sort of seen it earlier on. There is a resource monitor running alongside standard hardware settings there. Again, the controls exactly what you expect them to see, and we will do the mobile application as well later. There's your one panel bit of information there, but of course these break down. Creating new users, so creating a brand new user out the gate. We can call them Betty. Gives them, if there's a pre-existing group, I've created a sales team group, but you can do that as well. Click say what they can access. So let's give them a quota of 100 gig on that second volume. Go ahead, create a user, and it's that straightforward. And again, from there, you can adjust that user. And on top of that, you can go ahead and change some of the security settings. But unfortunately, a lot of those have to be done within the user currently. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, me as the admin user here, I've got not only the standard level of access and control, but much like other operating systems, if I go into my settings menu there, and we will cover security a little bit more later on, we've got that option there for two-factor authentication, whether you want to set up a secure email. So again, the two-factor authentication, it will depend on which service for OTP, etc. that you want to use, but you scan it, you go in. On top of that, changing the wallpaper, usual stuff. Also logging in and out of devices, what devices have got access via this account, killing them off, that sort of thing. I do kind of would like it if the admin had a little bit more control over these individual users. So for example, setting them as an admin, I really like that I can delegate that user on the fly, something that can be very, very useful in the field. But I do think the idea that I could enforce password rules, enforce some of that stuff needs to be added, as a sysadmin would need to change and ultimately force new things in on those users as changes happen. Now, storage management is pretty much there, I would argue, both in terms of the aesthetic and in terms of the feature set. I've already created 2 storage volumes here. Let's go ahead and kill one of those off. Again, not 100% certain what this is going to do, but let's kill this off so we can rebuild and show you some of the options. This is just a singular SSD that I've got there based in the base. It's going to kill that off. But when it comes to creating your storage areas, there's a lot to like here. Notwithstanding, you've got ext4 and BTRFS, and they are using MDADM, but there is native ZFS support as well going into the back. So again, you've got those options for what you want to do. And although the OS drive is listed, it does highlight just how little or as much as you can do. Luckily, it does mean that you're not wasting that space. With a modest 64 gig install, I've still got extra space on this 500 gig drive that I can start using for storage. I wouldn't advise that. Utilizing your OS drive for more than the OS does open up to certain problems down the line, but at the very least, you've got the option there to take advantage of it if you really need it, maybe as a recovery, something like that, or for keys and stuff like that. But again, the available storage, I've only got right now the single drive available, but if we make our way into the pre-existing volume there, not only have you got the options there to sort of play around, set up the scrubbing, go through, assess the drive, set up some of the ZFS stuff to do with the caching, the compression, inline to duplication, stuff like that. Again, make sure you've got the RAM limits in place in order to take advantage of that. But you've got those options readily available to you natively within this device. It's a little bit more technical. I do think it could stand to have a little bit more guidance, a few little tips and an idea of what the noobs that are going to be using this know what they are doing. But I do love that we've got those configuration options for ZFS natively built in. And that goes down, by the way, to the SSD cache as well, which does allow you to apply very easily for read or write cache and adapt some of those settings as well. And that goes right the way down, of course, to that hibernation there at the top, which you can set up across the standard drives inside. Although I will highlight the tools for benchmarking drives inside aren't really there. So for example, if I wanted to quickly benchmark the capabilities of a drive inside so I can assess what it would be better suited for, there is no benchmarking tool per drive built in here. You've got standard smart, but that's really it. And I wasn't able to ascertain whether it would take advantage of, say, Seagate Ironwall Health Management. I didn't have any Seagate drives available for this video. They're all taken up by a UniFi system right now. But you do have the option to manage those external drives as well. And slightly side note here, you do of course have the option there for the native file explorer. You can open up multiple windows there, and it's got everything you're ever going to need there, whether it is compression, compaction, the copying, the pasting, the sharing, all natively built into this. Again, it's exactly what you want from the native file explorer, something that I heavily criticised TexOS for in a video that I recorded just a day ago at the time of recording this. And the settings, again, are pretty darn good. And that goes all the way down to the file services, of course, what you can and will not allow things to be mounted on. And as mentioned earlier on, thanks to that synchronization tool, a lot of that for local stuff, whether you're rocking Mac OS or you're rocking Windows there, is available. We're getting into the mobile side of things later on. But again, the options are where you want them to be. Duplicate file management built into the file settings there. Remote management if you're going to be bolting on other storage, or you're going to be bolting on cloud storage. More on that later on. Again, the options are there and they're presented very, very well, I would say. And as you may have noticed up to this point, it's very, very snappy as well. The same goes if you are going to be looking at the files built into individual apps, something a lot of NAS software doesn't provide, the ability to get into the app files, the breadcrumb file folder management of individual applications and services. Bear in mind, of course, you don't really want to dick around with those in most cases, and there's a reason most NAS brands don't include them. But sometimes when you want to apply changes to config files, just standard notepad stuff, it's nice to be able to have that. I wish there was a little bit of a warning flashing on screen, perhaps, to tell you not to fuck around with those areas, but it's still good to have that option. And again, you can choose different viewpoints there. You can choose whether you're going to accessing this as a sysadmin overviewing access or just general file breadcrumb stuff. So really good stuff there. Actually, returning slightly to something I mentioned there about remote folder mounting, I will say for the most part, the options are there. Whether it is you're mounting a local NAS or some other server on a LAN, or even remotely using something like WebDAV, or you're going to be using cloud mounting, the options are there. But do bear in mind the number of services supported, still pretty limited. Not even Google's on there at the moment, which really surprised me. But no doubt they're going to be adding more to these later on. Maybe it's a verification with those providers, those SaaS services. But the options are there, and thanks to local caching, you can speed up and at least lower the latency with some of those mounted drives pretty well. Alongside that, you do have the option of taking advantage of snapshots, either on a schedule or ad hoc as you need them. So again, pretty much everything you're going to want in a modern NAS system, and the fact that you've got ZFS rolled in as well. And again, remember, it isn't free. Still, nonetheless, I really like what I'm seeing here in terms of the storage capabilities of this system. Hell, some of you may have already noticed there is already support of iSCSI there, something that I think is weird when NAS brands don't roll this out. The idea that you can give some people some sandbox storage so that their local OS of choice plays better than it does with map drives. So kind of amazed sometimes that LUNs aren't possible on all NAS software out of the gate, and some of them, I'm looking at you, UniFi, currently limited to their enterprise platform there. So at least you've got that option there to create that targeted storage, whether it is for video editing, whether it is for virtualization as a target. The options are there, and they're pretty intuitive of what you would expect. Do bear in mind, again, the security protocols that you do set up, the pathways you set up per user, do override most other choices you make in the OS, just like any other NAS operating system. But at the very least, they're showing willing by including these things out the gate. And talking of things being available out the gate, I will say backup operations and synchronization tools are there. They're a little lean right now, and I can see that the fundamentals and the framework are there, but I'm not going to say it's especially deep. So for example, creating a new task there, if I wanted to synchronize a local folder there, go ahead, select a file path. If you want to add more, next, choose your targeted path. Again, not a lot of cloud providers currently available. At the very least, you've got ease of setup with another Fygo system, or if you're going to be utilizing a local folder, a USB, the cloud services we mentioned, or remote. So for example, if we go ahead and just choose another location on this device, we select that location. Let's go for that ISO folder there. Then you've got all the standard options for your filtering rules, your exclusions, that kind of stuff, the schedule as well. And it's that straightforward to set up. The same goes if you want to go for a remote backup storage, that's in the other direction. You've got the same level of options and filters. It's a little basic, but at the very least, it's all included there. I'll be interested to see just how they can push that, because there's nothing like an OS level backup at this point, and that's a pretty advanced feature to have. But again, they're nailing down the fundamentals, and I like that. But nailing down the fundamentals aside, there are still gaps. Number one, when we're going into the file mark folder and we want to create a new shareable folder, so there's not really anything in the way of local setup encryption on these. Now, again, I add that caveat that encryption is built in, and there is peer-to-peer encryption if you use the remote access services, and you have the option to adjust and add a lot of this stuff, as well as your own custom certificate, or just setting up a Let's Encrypt, or the way the system is set up early doors using the remote access service. But just having certain features like read once, write many, or worm, isn't really there. You can't really enable a lot of that stuff. I know, again, some of this stuff is native to ZFS, so again, you copy and write and stuff like that, but still, those are things that are missing compared to a lot of their contemporaries, and we have to call that out. Alongside other things that I think could stand to be improved upon are things like the security center here. This is a criticism I've regularly put at UGREEN's door, and because this lot are a paid platform, we've got to put it to them as well. I like that we have got antivirus stuff here, and the fact that it is scanning for malware. That's great, but when I have a security scanner on a NAS, what I care more about is the security of my system. Let me explain. For those that followed the channel before, you'll know that when I look at a security settings menu in any control panel, I'm looking at things like auto block, I'm looking at two-factor authentication, I'm looking at blacklisting, whitelisting, I'm looking at the firewall control and the certificate. You know that, we do that all the time. But I want to be able to scan this system at a click of a button. When I've got multiple users, I want to know when people are using weak passwords. I want to know if SSH has been left on. By the way, SSH is off by default on this. Or I want to know whether the admin account is active. I want to know whether the system is in an unsafe state. I want to know if, according to the logs, because remember, you have a huge amount of information here readily available, and fair play, Fygo, your logs are incredibly detailed. I will say, I want the idea that is being scanned. Malware, antivirus, include it, fine, great. But scan these Tell me when passwords are weak. Tell me that a password has been accessed 3 times wrong. Tell me those sort of things. I need auto blocking to be not just reactive in the way that the settings do dictate after a number of failed attempts. I want a security scanner to be periodically scanning and giving me information about my usage and the further external usage of the system. Again, it is something that Synology, QNAP, Terramaster all include. It is something I think people have an expectation for, and therefore the security scanner on this, as good as it delivers on what it's trying to provide, there are just a bunch of gaps in what it could provide that need to be filled. Next up, virtualization. Again, you've got the option for Docker. Again, add your registry of choice. And of course, you've got a virtual machine tool built in there as well. So again, the standard stuff that you want to see is there. And again, running VMs, there isn't like a VM image store on there that some places have provided, but I know licensing wise that can be very, very problematic. But pretty much all of the options you want are there with regards to tailoring this VM, hardware pass-through for like USB, or if you're going to be using a GPU card there. The options are available to set the VM up just as you would like. And again, we will return to that big range of questions that I've been putting forward to the brand in the follow-up video. And some of those do pertain to mounting some of these Docker and mounting some of these virtual images as well. So we'll come back to that later on. But I will say that unlike some brands that have been rocking out with a heavy dependency on Docker being the modus operandi of installing apps and services, I will say that the App Center on this for a comparatively new NAS operating system is pretty good. It's pretty good. The range of applications that are official, so whether it is using the AI engine that we'll talk about later on in the media area, the apps and services, the range of updates, whether they're automated, whether they're going to be just checked for, as well as a security policy and therefore listing which apps will be visible. It's all pretty darn good, as well as the direction and the volume that you want to target for these installs. You can see the community apps, they're broken down again by the filters, and you've got the manual installation as well. And as you can already see, there's some updates rolling out, so let's go ahead and do that. But as you can already see, this is one of those services where you can't just click. You've got to do each one of them individually. Now, again, there's two schools of thought. There will be some users that are knocked off by that simply because then you're waiting around. But I would argue this is a better way to do it, because once you try and install loads of them, you can change loads of stuff at once, and sometimes you can really F your system. But again, the tools are there. There is the support of third-party ones, and when you do install them, just like any other app, it is one click going in. So let's go for a third one. Let's go for Alarma, and it's going to be downloading that in the background. So we'll leave that to do its thing. But moving forward from that, what about the apps that are there, the official ones? I think we need to talk about the multimedia. We need to talk about photos and video. Now, the Photos application, it's getting there. It's pretty bloody close. And I would argue if you're coming from your Synologies, your QNAPs or whatever, it ticks a lot of the boxes. Not all, but a lot. If you're looking at things like image, I think there is an argument that there is still a ways to go back and forth. But a lot of the key bells and whistles are there. So for example, a lot of the AI integration, if we go into the settings menu there and we go for the AI settings, a lot of the models are one click ready to rock. The smart recognition, face recognition, duplication. And if you are taking advantage of a CPU that's got a little bit of NPU under the belt, a little bit of integrated graphics, the options are there. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to extend this whenever I was using like a GPU card or anything like that. The options are pretty standard there, and the facial recognition you can adapt, and the same goes for the object recognition, the consistency and the reliability of that, just the confidence threshold, as it were. But on top of that, when it comes to how it wants to manage and output a lot of the visuals, whether you want to go for original quality and more, the indexing of what's being accessed there, it's all pretty standard stuff. And with the facial recognition, again, pretty good. What I think is also key to highlight is recognition isn't just limited to photos. Recognition is also deep into the videos as well. So again, lots of geolocational data, presumably scraped from the metadata. Actually, if we go into, let's go for a photo of me. As you can see, some of these are videos where my face has been scraped from. So let's go for this image here. That's a screenshot, a terrible picture of both of us here, that was scraped out from the video we did with Storage Review. If we go in, we can find out a little bit more information about that. We can even get some of the information there in the metadata there in the background if you really want it. So all of that information is readily available there. And the fact that it's scraped from the video and the photos as well, I actually find quite pleasing, given this is a DIY NAS software, when some of you might be sitting on quite literally decades of video where that can come in. The AI search at the top, I would argue, still needs a little bit more work. It is definitely doing a job there. And when you look at the AI services, again, for objects and stuff that you've installed inside, they do seemingly do the job. But I just found it a little bit inconsistent at times. Once I was using names of people that I labelled on there when I was going for some quite basic stuff in terms of what I was looking for and combining different labels, it was working pretty well. But I wouldn't say it was the most consistent. Again, a lot of the surrounding information. So, for example, when I was looking for people who I knew were in certain albums, it was pulling up photos where at least one of the people was in the photos, but not both of them. But clearly the system knew that one of those people was in the overarching album, and therefore it was producing those results. So the strictness of the search policies, I think, is going to be key to a good AI search tool, simply because if you are running an AI search tool and you've got 100,000 photos, what you don't want is a search that produces 1,000 photos where 90% of them still aren't doing the job. So I think the AI search on this is definitely working, but it's not working well enough for me, or at the very least, strict enough. I know I could still adapt some of those settings and the threshold, a lot of the AI stuff there in terms of accuracy, but I think a lot of that should at the very least be a little tighter out the gate. I still love that you can scroll through and access image recognition and AI recognition in the video stuff there, but still, I do think there is a little bit more work to be done on that AI search built into the photo engine. That optimization extends, I would argue, to things like the geolocational information. So if we look at some of these photos, let's get rid of that one there, let's be more precise with London. I would like there to be a map. I love that it has crawled the metadata there to find videos and images that have been taking place in London. But London is still pretty broad. So whether it is that I would like to have a map produced or that broken down just a little bit more in terms of geolocational data, I appreciate might well mean you need to use a Google Map API and therefore licensing problems. But I do think there are ways and means to do this. And I hope they find one, because, again, utilising that has become kind of an expectation of turnkey NAS users when it comes to the scraping of all of this metadata and then utilising it in an established photo management app. But I do still like, with the AI recognition, that it is still brought into those smart categories automatically to break things down, as well as multimedia type being broken down quite extensively. And I like, for example, screenshots. That being broken away from photos will make things significantly easier. So when I go into that and then I can search within that subcategory, that is something that's been done for me. Same goes with duplication. If you want to start running checks on different areas of the system to find duplicate images and videos and just get them removed, or at the very least understand where there are savings to be made, I love that, all being built in straight away. Again, there's a lot to love here. I just think there's just a little ways to go. And by the way, don't critique the application, the OS, for scraping some of the metadata of the multimedia in here. I've added those directories because I wanted to test the extent of what this can do. But at the very least, you've got those options. Although I will highlight import Google Photos. That is a little bit, I think misleading would be hard, but I think overselling it, because I think a lot of users are going to assume that they're going to be able to sync their Google Photos account like you can do with the MARS project, or you at least could do on the QNAP side. But this does need you to drag and drop an existing folder. So whether it is you're going to have to go to like Google Takeout, get your images, download them, not great. I think a lot of users would like to either inject a Google takeaway link, or at the very least put in their information there. But I understand there's huge API problems, and it also goes with some of the scraping of the JSON data in the background. But nonetheless, I really like what I've seen here in the Photos app. It's good stuff. There's just still a ways to go. And for the video application, I like what I'm seeing. Again, they're trying to emulate Plex, they're trying to emulate Jellyfin, and they're trying to do it without you having to pay any kind of license and utilize your own hardware. For the most part, I love it. It's good. And indeed, the very fact that you can download the video application for your TV, for your player, is great. And that does extend, by the way, to the mobile application that we'll talk about in a wee while. And you can manage that, whether it is that you want to, go Billy Basic and go for the file service to take advantage of DLNA to stream stuff in the most basic, simple form, or you do want to take advantage of scraped metadata with the IMDb movie and TV database there for scraping. But I will say some of the scraping is a bit shaky. So, for example, in my test media folder that has lots of clips, some of them, I totally get it. It's a trailer for Spider-Man No Way Home. It has found that. Great. But things like my roast duck video file that I use for testing, let's go ahead and play that and get the audio turned off. This is an HEVC file that I use for testing a lot of transcoding. That is not the movie that the metadata has found. Again, the options are there and the player love it. But I will say the metadata scraping there is a little less optimized than I would like. It's good to have it and you don't have to pay anything extra. And I will argue I didn't have to get an API key or anything like that or get a connection to an IMDb account in order to scrape that. But the metadata isn't hugely accurate. The same goes for things like some of my other test files, my 8K test files. Again, playing great. The media player is solid. It does the job. But the metadata scraping could still do with a little bit more optimization, or at the very least not just grab the first thing and ram it in there. Still pretty good. Management there in the background, your libraries that you're going to choose to use, users that have got access, how much is happening there in the background, integrated graphics and transcoding. You've got a lot of that stuff. And if you don't want to use that, of course, go into the App Center, go ahead, use Jellyfin. You can just go ahead, where is it in the App Center there? Still installing that in the background. Sorry, I've put this on a very limited internet connection. But you've got those options for if you want to use Jellyfin. You've got the options if you want to use a containerized Plex install. It's really good. And also when you use these in the mobile application, that's just going to make things a lot easier for those that have looked at the recent price increases of things like Plex and gone, I think I'm going to shop elsewhere. Next up, we've got to talk about remote access. Realistically, if you were using some free off-the-peg software, you wouldn't trust the remote access on that service. You either wouldn't trust it or wouldn't use it. And you'd set up your Tailscale, you'd set up your own domain or whatever relay service. But when you are laying down actual cash for something and it says it includes remote access features, you're going to want serious access and you're going to want trusted access there as well. Now, when we go in here, we can go into the remote access services here. Now, currently I've set it up with their own Fygo Connect service there. That does allow for that URL when it is running through a certificate service there. And again, you can adjust and add your own as needed. You can use their own one, as well as using your own DNS service if you choose to. So for example, the number of services that you can set up for that have got pre-configured profiles is actually not too shabby. You can add those in there into your domain as you see fit. Now, if you go for their own Remote Connect service, you can see that on screen. You can still verify in with a two-factor authentication. You still verify in with their own encryption service, or you can use your own, as mentioned earlier on. And the same goes for the mobile access service as well, relaying in between there. Now, link sharing, you can set it up to be only on the local. You can set it up to take advantage of the remote access stuff if you choose, with the customized links as needed. Now, I've had the system set up for a few days now, and I had it in different router points. I went for different levels and service. I even restored the whole system once. In that time, I saw nothing untoward happening, not only with the localized client that I was connected to on a Mac, a Windows, and an Android mobile system, but also from the NAS itself running through two different router relay points there that was monitoring the traffic. Again, when I did go and look at the traffic flow regionally, the only Chinese traffic I saw coming through is a Chinese OS I was running on another video. Nothing to do with these guys, but I just thought I would add that in there in case any of the active flows there seemed a bit off. But genuinely, I saw nothing untoward during the overseeing of the remote access on this service. And also you can add that service, as alluded to earlier on, as the gateway path for that synchronization. So again, with the file pinning, the file access, it doesn't have to be on the LAN. You can use their inbuilt service there, or at least the inbuilt setup service there to add your own remote connection, and then use the Fygo Sync application, available again on multiple platforms, but on top of that, managed and set up via the desktop of the NAS itself in order to have that service running in the background. But I add the enormous caveat, and I'm sure the brand themselves would agree, they're still new to this. They're not the biggest name in the field right now. And I'm not saying you shouldn't trust it per se. I'm saying, at least until they're more established, I wouldn't set up remote access services to any NAS operating system until you've utilized it for a good 6 months minimum. And in the meantime, of course, you do have the access to other services as well in order to set up remote if you really, really need to. But for me, I wouldn't trust any new NAS operating system for at least 6 to 12 months and keep it only on the LAN. So now let's move over to the mobile applications and control on this, because again, it feels pretty fluid. I will say I'm accessing this on the LAN, I'm not using the remote access services, but at the very least, if we go into the main Fygo application there, it's pretty visible and clear. So regardless of what service you are using, the bulk of them are visible here. There's a quick start guide for setting the device up for the very first time. I don't know if you can set the device up out the gate utilizing just the mobile app. My gut says yes, but again, that is just based on what I'm feeling rather than what I can actually see there. But I will say, all the information and the control settings are here. The management of your license, changing around a lot of the system and services, file level access, creating new folders, managing individual tasks. They're all pretty much visible here. Of course, it will come down to your phone operating system of choice, what level of access it has got, but at the very least you've got pretty much all the bells and whistles that you're going to need, and the ability to manage the system, individual users, individual apps and services. It's pretty responsive, it's pretty snappy, and if we go into, for example, the App Center there's not many NAS OSs that I know of that allow you to install apps via the mobile app. So if we go ahead and just get MB there running in the background, it doesn't mean we can't do anything else while it's doing the job. Still, nonetheless, the ability to manage applications and services is still pretty good there. Now, the synchronization that we saw earlier on, so for example, if we want to go ahead and use the file management on our local system, there's that synced app tool there. If we go ahead into, say, the team folder and the shared folders, we can manage it in a traditional file folder way, but trying to find whether you're able to use the sync application doesn't seem hugely clear. You've got the backup ops there for your photo backup, something I would expect for a mobile application to provide on a local mobile device there. But if we go for like backing up Fygo and a lot of the backup ops and managing the ones that we've got on there, that's really managing the individual team share folders on the NAS and some of those other bits and bobs. It's not hugely clear to me. If we go into the app there for backing up Fygo, if we want to back up using that service, so we'll back up to the VM ISO area there, we choose the path, we go ahead, we go into the backup destination, and as you can see, there's our options. We're managing the backup ops, but it's not really typical phone backup beyond photos there. I would definitely like to see a lot more of that file pinning, streaming, live synchronization and shadow file stuff that we've already seen in the desktop clients arrive in the mobile backup appliance, and no doubt that will come along down the road. That's another one of those things that makes me wonder about the lack of Google Drive support, if that is a licensing thing and a testing happening there in the background. And maybe if I was using an iOS device, that would be an option that would be more present, but I haven't got that option here. The TV application there, you can see you can access it, of course, via this desktop app for managing the NAS, or you can go directly into the own multimedia application here. So if we just go in, I am going to have to use test footage here just because of YouTube and being a real pain sometimes in multimedia. But as you can see, we've got that. Let's get the volume turned down. We've got all the same options we had before, whether it is you want to stream, send it to somewhere else, change the playback quality there, again CPU dependent no doubt, minimize screen it so it runs there in the background. Of course you are going to have to manage that with your client device. But whether it is you want to download it local, whether you want to find out real-time information about it, some of the background metadata stuff, the options are all built in there. And the management is pretty much folder level or some of the streamed folders that you've chose to include. Now, management of individual apps and services is all right, I will say. If you go into the Docker, for example, unsurprisingly, although you can manage pre-existing containerized applications, you can't create a brand new one. That goes for whether it is you're using Compose. And in the virtual machine tool, it is actually possible to manage the virtual machine you are utilizing. Unfortunately, because I killed off Storage Pool 2 earlier on, that was where my VM was living, so I'll have to save that for the follow-up video. But you can manage and even deploy a virtual machine in the mobile application as long as the ISOs are already on the system. Now, if you go into the application center, it does indeed give you the ability, for example, to manage and kill and stop individual apps and services just like you would a mobile on the desktop appliance, which is actually pretty neat to be able to do that, as well as adding those third-party apps on the fly when you need to. Managing the logs is all available here, again, though I do wish there was a better management of those logs in terms of alerting the user via the scanner I mentioned earlier on. The photo management, again, is there. Everything you saw earlier on is possible via here, right the way down, by the way, to managing a lot of the AI settings there at the background of what you want to turn on and off on the fly. The mobile app does the job, and it's all done via that single portal. I think arguably, design-wise, as we've almost certainly alluded to in this video, a lot of these NAS brands are all chasing the same design, chasing the same UX, chasing a lot of the same deployment and code, but still nonetheless, it is done very, very well here, and I would argue done very consistently. That said, would be foolish to ignore that throughout the course of this video, RAM utilization has seemingly been pretty darn high, and a lot of that is to do with some of the bells and whistles and stuff I've been applying there in the background. But because this is a ZFS system, because it is taking advantage of a lot of the bells and whistles of native ZFS and some of the stuff that I've been running there in the background, I don't think I can recommend Fygo OS for anything less than 16 gig. I really believe that. On 8 gig, I'm sure it could run, and the minimum specifications from the website, I'm sure, are slightly lower. But unless you're going to be planning on not taking advantage of a lot of these benefits, I do think this is a NAS operating system that is going to be a little RAM heavy. And no doubt, as time wears on, they will optimize a lot of that utilization there in the background and lower those things. But still, nonetheless, maybe keep that in mind. But we can't talk about hardware utilization without talking about another big headline about this NAS operating system. And I will add, I've left it to the end of the video on purpose. And that is, that although I'm running this on an x86 system, the brand tells me that they are aiming for all of their features and services to be supported on ARM. Now, if you're not aware, ultimately, that means that they are going to be trying to provide a ZFS platform running virtualization, running full containerization, and all the bells and whistles in between, running things like a Rockchip, a Marvell, running out any of the newer generation ARM processors out there, which are way more power efficient, but getting more capable every day. Now, the reason I've added it here at the end of the video is, one, I want to believe it when I see it. Because trying to do all of the things we're talking about today on ARM, when you've got a relatively small team, yes, led by Linux maintainers, as they say all the time, I would say how much of their R&D is available for development for ARM versus x86 will be crucial in whether they can do that. Now, for a follow-up video, this is my MSR1 from Minis Forum, a device I reviewed a while ago, but has since gone back inside the box because it's the most powerful ARM system I've ever had. I would argue this is Mac chip comparable, the one that's inside there. It's rocking out an ARM V9 12-core processor there. Now, I'm going to be porting this OS onto that, and I want to see just how much of the bells and whistles of this software, from the ZFS to the virtualization to the seeming abilities of native ZFS being passed over, is possible on that, and just how well it runs. But that is for a follow-up video there. But I wanted to highlight it because very, very few of the top-end NAS DIY software in the market runs on ARM. Top of my head, Open Media Vault is the obvious one that a lot of people talk about, but TrueNAS on ARM, Unraid on ARM, it's a bit inconsistent, to be polite about it. So it'll be interesting to see just how well they do it, because that would be a particularly big feather in the hat of Fygo OS. Now, I'm going to wrap things up there because, as mentioned earlier on, I'm already asking many questions to this brand about this software, what it can and cannot do. But I need your questions as well. Take to the comments below, and anything that I've not covered in this video or is not covered from the Q&A you're seeing here on screen, then please do let me know, and that'll be raised in a follow-up video, either with a live Q&A with the brand, a pre-recorded Q&A, or just me going through every single question and your answers, or at least your questions and their answers, being put in a follow-up video. But at the very least, right now, I will say I'm quietly impressed with the abilities, the stability of this platform, and ultimately having an option in the DIY NAS space right now that is both user-friendly and highly capable. Up until now, my big recommendation in this space would have been, for those looking for true user-friendly utilization, has been ZimaOS. And right now, this challenges that recommendation. At $50 a year, or $49 a year currently, and a price tag there at $200 pre the bigger $299 price increase later on, not only does it make price offerings from things like HexOS at $199 and soon $299 look a little bit pricey for my liking, but on top of that, the feature set being offered here is just not available elsewhere in the way that it is being presented now. It doesn't have the legacy and history of TrueNAS, it doesn't have the legacy and history of Unraid, and it doesn't have the commercial support and scale of things like QNAP, Synology, and more. But I would argue right now, these guys are on to something. And if they can maintain the course here, as well as continue to polish, optimize, and make this even more efficient, as well as that ARM stuff as well, I think Fygo could really be something in the NAS space. But we'll have to wait and see. So again, questions below for the Fygo team for a follow-up video. And apart from that, thank you so much for watching. There's a link below to their website as well. There's that 30-day trial. Give it a punt if you want. Again, keep it on the LAN, I would. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.